Hey everyone, Josh Sachs here with another episode of Local Pros. This week we have a different kind of pro joining me. This pro is a pro disc golf course designer, at least on his own property, Mr. Gabe Robinson. Gabe, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Josh. Nice to be here.
Wonderful to have you. As many people that have watched this series have seen or have heard, Project 15 has come up on a number of people's favorite course lists. So I'm sure that's wonderful to hear. It's certainly one of my top courses. And just last year, it was named it was the 10th course that Canadians most wanted to play, according to UDisc.
Yeah, that was sort of an interesting statistic. I was flattered by that as well. I tried to do a little extra thinking to get behind what that statistic meant. And it turns out you have to kind of pay attention to where most disc golfers are in Canada. And most of them are around Ontario. And if you're a serious disc golfer, I think you've probably already played my course. So that would have affected how many people would have wish listed it, because you're not going to see a lot of wish listings if you've in fact played that course. So it looked like most of the people who were wish listing it were from the West. But as you know, half of Canada lives between Niagara and Quebec City. And a lot of those people who are interested in disc golf have already been here. So, but yeah, it was nice to show up on that list. It seems to get a bit fair amount of popular or good press, I should say, from UDisc and things to do with UDisc. I think the rating is still an average of 4.8, which is among the very highest anywhere. That doesn't always mean that you get sort of included in all of these fun lists, but it's still pretty cool to be in the conversation. And I think it was Andrew Leyland who said a couple of years ago, he was talking about Raptors and my course, and what was the third one? Might have been Maple Hill. And he said, if you like this, you'll prefer this course. If you like that, I prefer that course. And then he just went, I mean, come on, if you're being talked about in the same breath as those two courses, you're doing pretty well. So the rest is splitting hairs.
Mm-hmm. I actually wonder if a couple of the people that wish listed your course played this past weekend, because I don't know if Karen and Julie had made it out to P15 prior to this past weekend's Project 15 Open.
They were out on Friday, I think. I ran into them when they were walking the course, and might have even been Thursday. It's such a blur in the days before and even during a tournament. But no, they had not been to the course prior to the actual the end of last week, which of course is right before the tournament, which was last week. So
you need to get more of that Quebec crew coming out across to your property, because it is such a great property. As frustrated as I can often get at that course, because it is very well designed and I can't always hit the lines I want to. It's always fun playing there. Speaking of, let's take it back a step to how did you get into deciding to put a disc golf course on your property?
Well, it's actually kind of a stupid story. I think anybody would prefer to hear a story where I say, I tell you something like I had this dream and I was a passionate player and I thought what I have to do is build this very specific thing. I need to build the best course under these parameters. And it didn't exactly go that way. I originally thought I would put in 3 very short holes. And there'd be a bit of a loop. You know the course well enough to sort of imagine with me, but it's roughly what's today hole 1, 2, and 18. I figured in that little area, I'd put together 3 short holes in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 foot holes. And, I would just learn to play some disc golf on that particular piece of land. I knew the land pretty well. I think it's a very interesting piece of property with an interesting history, both, in terms of settler colonialism and in terms of, the geological history. So I thought it'd be fun to just put in 3 holes. And over time, I spoke to a few people about the idea and thought, well, if you're going to go to do 3, like if you're going to even start such a project, you might as well do 9. 9 turned into sort of 18. Some other people got involved, people to whom I'm still very grateful for their inputs and ideas and some of the design help and most importantly for the labor they added to the long amount of labor that went into this. But in conversation with these people, Carl being one of them, it seemed more and more to make sense that to build something a bit bigger. And I have a fairly big experience in ball golf. Not to say I'm good at it, but that's sort of where I came to disc golf from. And my sort of, if you want to make it sound important, my sort of theory of disc golf course design, again, I'm being careful not to sound like I really know what I'm doing, but it comes from an aesthetic and an approach to the game that it really starts with ball golf, in my experience in ball golf. And of course, one of the major problems with ball golf is land usage and exclusivity and issues to do with pesticide use and rich people getting to do what they want with the land and all this stuff. There's a lot of problems with disc or with ball golf, and I was quite sort of thrilled by the idea that disc golf did a lot of that stuff quite differently. I thought it was pretty interesting. And the scale was such a fascinating thing because you could have a legitimate par four that plays in the way that I believe a par four should play. And hell, you only need 600 or 700 feet to do it. And contrast that with ball golf, you need acres and acres to make one hole work. So if you're interested, my course sprawls over about 30 acres, maybe a little bit more. And it's a fairly big, fairly demanding course. And that would, do 2 or 3 holes in ball golf terms. And you'd need a fleet of mowers and a whole bunch of labor to make that thing run. My course needs a bunch of labor, one mower, and absolutely nobody ever makes any money ever. But it's a fully legitimate course in terms of what the sport demands. And that appealed to me early on. And I thought, if I'm going to do anything to make a course, I think what I want to do is come up with a course that's going to be interesting and worth playing to those who are some of the best in the game. I don't know why I went that direction. I felt like the right thing to do. It felt like some of the people I was dealing with were leading me in that direction, and I was happy to go that way. Of course, the very first tournament I held here or was a part of at my course, we weren't even open. We didn't have all the holes open. I think you skipped hole 10 and 11 at the time. But one part of the sort of funny story of it is I started the idea in December of 2016, got a little bit serious about it by the end of that actual calendar year, was starting to cut come January. A couple of months later, had basically a layout scratched out. The layout changed a lot. I really do enjoy the process of that layout design work. And it kept, changing every time I looked at the maps. But then sometime in the spring of 2017, Carl, I think the tournament they had originally planned was going to use the old course Tin Lid, and Tin Lid was suddenly non-viable. And I was approached to say, would you host a piece of the provincial tournament for 2017? And with that came a promise of a whole bunch of work to get the course open. Not all of that promise came through. But I sure appreciated the fact that it just had to get open in that short period of time. And I just had the amount of time and the amount of money that I had. I wasn't all that stressed about it. I tried to get really far with it. But the nice thing is, rather than my original plan, which was, build a few holes, take 5 years to make this course happen, fast forward 5 months and I had a course that was playable, baskets in the ground, and already a bit of a reputation as being something to take seriously, even though if you were to compare that course to the course that it is today, these are sort of, obviously the bones were there in the beginning, but this is night and day. They're nothing like today, what it was in 2017 when we had sort of scratched it out of the woods. So not sure I answered your question directly, but I told you a few things that might be interesting.
But I only started or picked up disc golf in the winter of 2020. So the first event I was there for was the Nat Sats in 2021.
Oh yeah.
And I know the course has changed quite a bit between now and then, but looking back at 2017, were most of the baskets, I hesitate to use the word temporary, but I've noticed a lot of the baskets aren't necessarily in sleeves on all the holes, and you have different pin positions, and some of them just move around that way. Was that still the case back in 2017?
Yeah, we've had a lot of changes in that time. I mean, the temporary baskets are a real bonus for two different reasons. One is that it is some of that ground is nearly impossible to dig, so it's hard to dig into rocks. Even though
Yep.
I bored into a piece of granite on hole 6, um, so that's a handy thing. The most important thing about the temporary baskets, in my opinion, is you get to move them around and experiment and try different things. And once again, I'm coming from, at least in my mind, I'm coming from a world of ball golf where tournaments work where you have four days of play, 4 rounds, and every single day you are likely to play a slightly different variation of your tees and an absolutely different variation of your pin positions. So
Mhm.
I think that makes a ton of sense, and I think it makes sense for competitors at a high level to have to interpret these variations in greens and so on. Now, ball golf and disc golf are not parallels; they're not symmetrical, let alone symmetrical opposites. There's a whole lot of variation and nuance in the way that we treat a green, and it's very different from the way that ball golf treats a green. So some of those ideas don't transfer terribly well.
Mhm.
I've come to realize that most people seem to want to play the tournament layout. They want to have it in the ground a week beforehand so they can practice it. They want to look at it on UDisc. They want to plan their upshots. They want to think about where their misses are. This is all just smart golf
Mhm.
playing of any sort. But they are less tickled by the idea of a whole new layout tomorrow and a whole new set of pin placements. Even though, if we're trying to be diabolical game masters, that's one of the tools you have in your quiver, if you will. Um, so anyway, those baskets, comparing 2017 baskets to 2024 baskets, in almost every case, I've added at least one additional basket position since then. If you look at UDisc, there are a number of different baskets labeled, main, short, long, medium. Those are the main four. A handful of these holes, I think it's about 6, have a main position. So you can imagine the sixth hole, there's a basket in the rock. That's the only basket currently.
Mhm.
Fourth hole, it's mounted in rocks. That's the only basket. You look at the eighth hole or the second hole, which are very rocky ground. It's on a temporary basket base, and I move that around all the time, trying to come up with interesting ways to play the hole, ways to soften the hole for difficulty if I have certain people or certain groups coming through, ways to make it harder to be more fun. And the other part is, as I continue to think about how to make these greens work and the shots that go into those greens, and the experience of playing that hole, sometimes you move that basket sort of onto the margin of the hole and you think, can I remove a big chunk of what's off to the side of here to make this green twice as big? And being able to actually put a basket in that spot and to walk back and think it through goes a long way with respect to the design process. But yes, changed a bunch. Here's an example of what's changed, just for fun, because it's sort of relevant to the tournament that just happened. If you can imagine hole 12, um, hole
Mhm.
12 has a new basket, or pardon me, a new tee, longer tee, um, and you throw sort of up a gap into a flat uphill landing zone, and then you throw across a gap. There's a bunker, and then a sort of a nooked green. So that's the hole as of a month ago, less than a month ago. That's the whole back basket position. That's new from a couple years ago. Back tee position. That's about 3 weeks old. Big thanks to Pubs for helping me put that in the ground. Big thanks to Hugh Dobson for cutting that. His friend Johnny McGee, who used to be my English teacher, also helped out a little bit. It's kind of fun. But that hole used to be what is today the short tee pad, was the
Mhm.
only tee. And the ridge that you throw up to was where the basket was. It was right on that first ridge. It was a 300-foot
Oh.
hole. Yeah. So a little later, I pushed the basket back. I dug that bunker. I put it on the little ridge in the back. Later, I added the forward tee. So now at that point, I was in the process of adding a whole set of forward tees. In some cases, I took the original tee and I just added a back tee. In other cases, like this hole, I added a forward tee. And so this hole went from being a 300-foot uphill, hyzery, pitchy shot with almost no tooth, unless you threw it way right or way left. It's now, I think, quite an interesting hole with a long basket position. You're throwing about 350 to place up to get it through a narrow opening. Instead of it being really prescriptive in the sense that you really had to hit a very small area, now you've got a number of ways to play through that green. It's a half a stroke easier than it probably needs to be. So you can play a little more carefully if you want to. You can also be a lot more aggressive and get out of trouble. And now, of course, you throw all the way across that pit, over the bunker, through that tiny little green into the back of that green. And now we have a hole that's better than 500 feet, which, yes, is a soft par four. But in my mind, at that moment in the story of the round, and I'm always thinking about the way this course plays. When you start on hole 1 and finish on 18, what is the, excuse the sort of cheesy terminology here, but it's, what is the story that you live and play? How does it work? And that means the most on your first 3 holes, and in my opinion, your last 3 holes, particularly if you're in some kind of a competition. What if you and I are tied finishing the 15th hole? What lays before us? What can we do as competitors? The last thing you want are 3 easy birdie holes or 3 survival holes. You need holes that people can do especially good things and they can get themselves into trouble on. So anyway, back to 12 real quick. Longer tee, longer, and then again, longer basket, using the space that's available. So that hole is radically different than it was in the beginning. And just about every hole has been widened substantially. And I've been in the process the last couple of years of reworking a few of the tees. And some of that was just because I saw a way better idea. Some of it was that the original tees were just kind of put there because that was the best idea we had at the time. And in other cases, they were in the wrong place. Like the decisions that were made were bad decisions with respect to what I now know about disc golf, which is always changing, which is part of the fun.
I'm thinking of 12 and the way you're describing it. So what were last weekend the short tees? That was the original tee position?
That's right.
And that's what turned into the longs when you added the shorts.
I think you might have it a little bit backwards. Originally, what it was on the weekend, we called the short position,
Right.
which I think was tagged as new short 2024. The short position that you saw on the weekend is the old long position.
Right.
And I put a short position that was about 80 or 90 feet shorter. And it made the hole quite simple. But it was kind of the white tee. So about a month ago, I moved the long tee back about 85 feet, and once I did that at the last minute, it might have even been like Wednesday night or Thursday night before the tournament, I moved what was the old forward position back to what was the original tee on that hole. At one point, the only tee on that hole is now the short position. Yeah.
Okay, because I recalled the first couple of times playing it and playing the shorts. I'm like, I remember being on the right side, basically under that tree, and that's not there anymore. And that used to be like the straight up the gut, like go for it in one, where it's not necessarily a feasible play from the back tees. But you know what? I enjoy playing that course every time because it's always something different. And hole 2, very, very devious pin position for this past weekend's tournament. I don't know if you're necessarily expecting the weather and the wind that we had, but putting it like right on the edge there, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, that was a bit of a little bit of a gamble. I mean, part of what also goes on now that the Project 15 Open is kind of a real thing, like it's a yearly event. I do some thinking about what we did last year and what we want to do this year that is either the same because it was successful or different because last year we just want to do things differently. So last year, that green was extended a fair amount from its original position. That green is much, much shallower and much, much narrower. So I made a lot more space on the player's right and a lot more space in the back. So last year I wanted to use the longest position, and it's actually on a sort of a reverse slope. It's a down slope. It's very tough to stop the disc back there. And if you're long, you're into a little bit of a dense chunk of woods in there. And I kind of like that. I think one of the fun things about short holes is that you have to use other problems for the player. They have to force them to stop the disc, not just throw straight or what have you. So, but what the thing about that back position, it really takes a lot of the pit out of the way. And one of the things people often say about the course is, I really like this elevation, this gravel pit, these slopes and so forth. That's a lot of fun to people. And I get it. And if you ended up in the pit off the tee last year, all you could do was sort of pitch it up towards the basket. It's a fairly easy throw, so most of the time you're just sort of saving par, feeling good about yourself. But you were not holding out, and you had no chance to really make birdies if you weren't up on the top. So this
I don't
year,
think you could see it last year. Like
what
if
was
you're
that?
in the pit, I don't think you could see the basket.
Not from below. No, not from below. So it was a blind, a lot of this kind of throw overhead. And you'd often sort of need someone to stand in front of the basket for you and go, it's right here. And then at least in casual rounds, we would do that. Can you just stand in front of the basket for a second so I know what I'm throwing at? And this year I thought, we really want to do something different with this hole. And the idea I had was, let's put it on the edge of the pit so that even if you don't make that throw, you're doing something interesting with the opportunity to make that birdie, even with a bad throw. And then I thought, well, that means that we have to add a little bit. I keep saying we, I don't know who I'm talking about. I have to now add something about the throw, the initial throw, the tee shot, that is a little more treacherous. It can't be a sort of a pitchy first shot. So it's going to be a high zero shot for most right-handed backhand players. Wind always plays some havoc on that hole because you're so sheltered and you're not sure what the wind's doing. And you don't have as much room on the right as you want to shape that shot left. So anyway, I was not anticipating the winds we have, maybe in this modern state of near ecological collapse. All disc golf has to be played in the wind. But I was hoping it would just be dry, which it was fairly dry. But it does make a big difference in the way the wind swirls in that pit and comes up those slopes can be really confusing, especially if you're not used to it. But I wanted to put it out on the edge. I want to give people a chance to attack it from below, even if they miss that shot. And I wanted to make sure that the most of the safe shots, because this is the other side of that, is most of the safe shots are going to be running into positions that make your comeback putt quite challenging if you don't make it. So that was the sort of theory there. And this is the idea that, golf is like a live puzzle. The whole here's some of my own bullshit course designer theory is when you stand on a tee, one of the things you want it to sort of lay out before you like a beautiful postcard. You want it to just be beautiful. You also want it to make sense in the sense that you know where to throw. You want to have options, but you don't want to sit there going, what am I supposed to do on this one? But the other piece is golf is a puzzle. It's a live action puzzle. And the elements that make it into a puzzle or a game have to be apparent for it to work. And if you've got a whole bag of shots, if you can make every shot, you have a bigger toolkit and you have the potential to enjoy the puzzle more than a guy like me who has only one or two throws that really work. So whenever you're standing on the tee, I think part of your job as a designer is to make that puzzle apparent and then to challenge people to do a little bit more or sometimes less with their answers. One of the big problems you face if you're working on courses is that somebody's going to try to go over the hole, right? They're going to throw some kind of super sky hyzer and risk everybody's life and limb in the vicinity. So unless you tuck that up against trees and so on to take that away, someone's going over your hole. It's just going to happen. So the other part is people are also going to try to reach into their bag of tricks and come up with some different ideas. And those ideas and all the things that you can do get smaller and smaller as things like wind and wet and other problems show up because people get more and more conservative in those settings. So unfortunately, people were mostly left with throwing flat, stable, sort of gentle hyzers that put them in a position to hopefully not miss and end up back in the pit on their second shot. But it's not a long hole. It's one of the two shortest holes on the course. And I thought this is a great opportunity to do something that's not deadly hard, but certainly going to stick with you a little bit because it's also not at all easy.
Is there one hole that you would consider to be the signature hole of your of Project 15? Because I'm sure a lot of people have some in mind, but I'm curious as to what your take is.
Well, there's different categories to sort of weasel around your question a little bit. If we're talking about sort of aesthetics and we're talking about, back to the idea of postcards, I suspect it's the fourth hole with the goalie, the big tree that reaches across. I think for a lot of people, that is the sort of most iconic hole from an image point of view. I think it's a cool little hole. I wouldn't say it's my favorite, nor what I think is the most interesting or successful hole. I'll give you some more bullshit here, but they're all my babies, and I love them all. But the other side of that is there are some pieces of that course that I think are really, really good, and I don't mean the whole course. There's problems all over the place, as is the case I think with every single course. But there are some chunks that I'm really pleased with the decisions that are presented to the player, the beauty that they're confronted with, the shape and form of the land. Sometimes it's beautiful old trees. And then again, the kinds of shots you have to make, how unusual some of those shots are, how demanding they are. And again, this question about decisions. I mean, you're always asking yourself, is the aggressive answer worth the risk? And this is a central question to the game of golf, all golf. So I'm being a little wordy here, but to try to answer your question, there are a few holes that I think are sort of exceptionally good in the way that they check some of those boxes. I think the new long version of 14 is a really, really successful hole. I think that does just about everything about as well as I can do it. The jury in my mind is still out a little bit on hole 12, the new version of hole 12, which we were talking about a minute ago. But I think for what is essentially a soft par 4, I think that's a really, really good soft par 4. I'm not sure sometimes you ask yourself, how do I make that a true par 4? And I don't think you need to ask that question in this case. For what it is, the component parts, the slopes, the gaps, the trees, the natural beauty, the constructed elements like the bunker and so on. I think that's a really well playing hole. The play for position, the fact that being more aggressive off the tee can directly make your next shots easier. Being overly conservative can actually cost you. I think that hole's really, really successful. Some of the other things. Hole 10 has changed a whole bunch. Like it's almost a new hole in the last few years compared to what it used to be. There's a few parts of that hole, which is only about 800 feet at its longest run. There's a few parts that I think are just brilliant, and there's a few parts that still need some work. What else am I happy with? I think hole 16 is a huge success altogether. I think it's a great hole, and I think it comes at a great time. I think that's a birdieable but demandingly long, moving left to right hole with a challenging green is kind of a perfect moment at the 16th hole to face that particular kind of challenge. I think the 17th green is about as good as it can get. I have a few changes in mind, but again, I can't just give you one hole again, whatever. They're all my babies. I love them. Here's another one. I think if you put it all together for once again a slightly short par 4, the 6th hole, now with the new tee and the clearing that's gone on in the center of it, and the softening on the left and back of the green from the last couple of years. I mean, that's got to be among some of the best holes in people always use a sort of region of comparison. What I mean is I just think it's a really great hole. What I might say is it's got to be one of the best par 4s in the world. I'll puff out my chest and I'll say in the world. It's a great hole. I think it's really, the parts work. And if you try to explain it to me, I might say, I don't think that a hole with that many trees in the middle is going to be good. If you explain it to me, I would probably say, I would object to what your claim is. And then you get out there and you think, especially with the new short tee, I was like, man, this hole is really working. Now, part of what that hole leans on is bad footing. So it sort of costs you 20 or 30% of your distance, potentially, which is a perfectly reasonable trade-off as long as the hole's not 1,000 feet trying to be a par 4. Everything else, I think, works really beautifully for an ultimately flat hole through the woods. That's a great hole. Anyway, I'll stop rambling, but so I can't pick one hole. You forced me to, I try, but I'm just really happy about these little chunks.
And then having the elevated basket like that, that basket being embedded in the rock, I think really finishes that hole very nicely. It's still a challenge. You're not just left with a basket that kind of you're not just kind of left with a basket at regular height on the green. The nice elevation, you've used the landscape to your advantage in that case. Like, I think it's really great. So let's talk a little bit about the tournaments you've had there. You mentioned 2017 was your first tournament. It was, I guess, one round of the provincials that year. The next one, or the first one I was ever there for, was the 2021 NatSats, which I guess you co-ran with Jeff and Kara. Was that tournament the most people you've had on the court, like through the course in a regular tournament?
Yeah, it certainly was, and part of it was that we did what we around here call tea times. So I can't remember the number, that it sort of sticks out at around 160. So I think we put 160 unique players through the course each day for 2 days. I think that's how it went. And that was like tea time starting at whatever 7 or something, and the last tea time 4:30 or something like that. And Jeff and Kara really did a fantastic job of running that. You use the phrase co-ran, and yes, I do run tournaments in my way, but I really have to leave a lot of the credit for the organizers, the people who know people, who have the social capital, who have the skills, who know how to run all the computer stuff. Now, like, in some respect, half the tournament happens online rather than in on the ground. So Jeff and Kara ran that tournament and did a beautiful job. Kara had to send off whatever the number would be, 150 divided by 4, roughly, that many groups, and tell them the safety wrap and tell them the quiet wrap and tell them all the stuff. Every 13 minutes, another foursome went off, and it went basically without a hitch. They organized the right groups in the right order. So the better players were done and gone long before the less skilled players were starting and taking longer to run the route. But that, yeah, I think that would probably be the maximum number we've had through. Though this past weekend, with 2 different tournaments back to back, got really close to the same numbers. Again, I think it was 160 something with the NatSats, and this past weekend we had something like 140, not counting non-competing people. So that was awfully close. But of course, once again, that was 2 tournaments rather than one. So I mean, the tea time thing is better for a lot of reasons, in my opinion. It's closer to what I think of as being sort of real golf, again, being stuck in the ball golf paradigm. But the other piece about it is that you get to play the course in the order that I intended it. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm being some kind of auteur god figure who thinks I can control everybody's lives. But a whole lot of the decisions I made through the design process were thinking about the experience as being linear. You start on 1 and you finish on 18, and you're in a competition, you're minding your scores, you're heading into the last third of the course, and you're going to look at your scorecard, and you're going to look at the digital scorecard and say, what do I have to do to place, or to make up ground, or to not lose it, or to win it? And all of that's been written into the design of the course, at least in my mind. And playing shotgun is a really great necessary evil for the way that we do tournaments. And it comes with a bunch of really important bonuses, including the fact that we all get to stand together for players meetings, come back together at the end at lunch, and have social time and spend time together, which is a key piece of this foolish pursuit that we're all a part of. That's part of the reason we're here. And unfortunately, the kind of tea time approach, flex start, I think is the other term people use in the sport, for a number of reasons, takes away some of that stuff. But it does give you, in my opinion, a slightly more true golf experience, at least on my property.
It's hard to do tea times at this time of year without really limiting the number of players that can come through the course. And for wanting to do 2 rounds for the event, I think, for better or worse, the shotgun two rounds in a day for each, I guess, split of divisions made the most sense. NatSats, I think we're in late, like mid-July or so, like when the days are at their longest. So you can pump all the people through for the entire time, and hopefully not get 4 seasons worth of weather in one day.
Yeah, that was unfortunate. I mean, everybody's spirits were high, and it was better than last year, which was truly wet. and truly cold. But yeah, the wind's a pain. I felt for the competitors on a few accounts where you'd see them making what were pretty stock shots and going, throwing hands in the air, going like, that was not what I wanted. I mean, I was watching on 14, and this is the first time I've seen this, and it was exciting. A guy threw across the pit, didn't get up onto the top shelf for the green, but he had a view of the basket. He threw a sort of, I think it was a forehand shot. And if this finger is the chain, or pardon me, the pole in the middle of the basket, his disc went into the basket, struck the chains, hit the pole, the wind pushed it up, and then spit it out. So it went ching, zhik, and out. And I don't think he saw it because he was, 2 stories below where I was standing. But I mean, it's that kind of effect that unfortunately takes a little bit of the golf factor out of the game. You want to be able to control the flying object as best you can, and the wind adds this level of variability that it can be demoralizing. Now everybody's got to play in it, but again, we play in the spring before the leaves are in, and the wind is a whole lot nicer in the back holes in the woods once the leaves come in. But I mean, it was swirling on hole 10. Guys were struggling. It's unfortunate. I mean, it's not what you want. But everybody seemed to play on with high spirits and still have some fun.
It's weather aside, like it's still one of the best events of the year. I love coming out here. I love coming out to the property. I wish I could get out more. It is a bit of a drive from Toronto.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's always fun coming out there. Recently, it was in the last couple of years. I apologize for not remembering exactly. You installed a second course on the property, a par 3 course that I think you called Project 2.
Project 2, that's right. Yep.
That was that for getting more people through the property, giving, I guess, the juniors or less experienced players a chance to experience the property without getting discouraged.
I wish I had a better answer for you. I think like everything with the disc golf thing, it started with a good idea, and it kind of got out of hand, and I couldn't stop. I think that's kind of how both courses have gone now. I get excited about the potential for making something fun and something I can share with people, and I get excited about the way to use certain land features and try to figure out how to turn that into a puzzle and turn that into a golf hole. And on top of that, when you think in terms of 9 holes and 18 holes, there are some sort of parameters that are a lot like a jigsaw puzzle, a different kind of puzzle here, where you're trying to fit the parts into your land. So Project 2 sort of emerged in the winter, must have been like 2021, I think is roughly when I started. And once again, I thought, what if I threw a couple of short holes and I could learn to throw some up shots better if I just had a couple extra holes here? And I kept thinking to myself, why would you do this? You can walk an extra 100 meters and throw on real holes. Why would you tell yourself that you need to build more holes? And by that point, all reason was out the window, and I was going, oh, this is a really cool spot. What if you had a tee here, and what if you had a basket there? That'd be a really cool shot. And then I have 3 of those that kind of fit together in a nice way. And then I think, well, I've actually got a 9-hole layout here that's kind of fun. And that's only $5,000 in baskets, which, we all have lots of $5,000 lying around begging to be used, right? So I kept playing with it, and it was winter, and there's not a lot I can do on Project 15 in the winter because I'm generally stuck not wanting to wade through the snow. So I spent a bunch of time that winter just laying out holes, thinking I may build this, I may not. And as I say, things got a little out of hand. It went from being 9 holes to being 18 holes. And then spring came, and I thought, well, yeah, actually the problem was I didn't think. I had already started, and I never really gave it any sober second thought. It was sort of, I was already underway. And then I was sort of halfway through building it, and I thought, what am I doing? Why do I want a par 3 course? And then I talked to some other people, including Carl, and Carl's like, that's badass. What a great idea, And I thought, well, yeah, this is actually kind of a fun way to do it. And one of the things I thought was sort of neat about the whole Project 2, creatively, Project 2 comes after the first project. That's why but it's also effectively a par 2 course, because you know, that's how you want to play it. You know, if you get a 3 on that course, you did not do all that well, even if it is par. So I think most people who have the privilege of being involved in disc golf course work or course design, most people probably start with little courses like Project 2. They probably start in Hamilton Park, or they probably start in little infill courses on small municipal properties or in their own back 40. And then if they're lucky, and mostly lucky, they may get off and get to design and be a part of building larger courses. And I went the other direction. Again, luck in the sense that I had a course, or pardon me, I had the land that I could work with. But I got to say, I learned a ton going back to the micro course. There's a lot of those sort of sets of questions and sets of solutions you have to work yourself through for every green. And the scale was so much smaller that even when it took me 3 or 4 days to cut and polish and clean up a hole, it was like, that's like, I don't know, 100 feet of work on Project 15, which is like 9,000 to 10,000 feet at its longest. And this is nothing. This is a joy. And Project 15 is nearly done anyway, and I needed a break from it and so on. So again, I'm being a little bit playful when I say it, but really the idea struck me in the winter a couple of years ago, and then totally got out of hand. And the next thing I knew, I have this second course, which I think those who play it, I mean, Oz was out playing it this weekend and he thought it was great. He's like, yeah, this is perfect. You should have your M2s in your amateur tournaments play this course. I think they'd love it. There's some problems, some limitations with the course with respect to safety, and the other one being parking, because it was built to use space that Project 15 didn't use. It wasn't exactly built for tournament use. So converting it to do that is a little bit problematic in its way. But like Project 15, there's a whole bunch of parts to that course that I really love. I think is really fun, beautiful, exciting. There's a few sleeper parts that aren't that interesting. I should have said snoozer, not sleeper. Like there's a few boring bits on that course. And it doesn't just have sort of brute length to make up for any of that. But what a great learning process to get to go backwards from long to short, and think through yet another 18 little holes. And I'm actually going to redo the last 3 in the next little while. The last 3 need to be worked. The former 18th hole was just not good. And that was the second iteration of the 18th hole that was also not good. So I traded it I rebuilt the 18th hole, made it slightly better. And then with some help from Hugh Dobson, who's helped a whole bunch over the winter and last year, he sort of gently said, I have an idea about how you could rework one of these holes, but it might mean you have to think about reworking 3 holes. And he started by saying, like, one of my favorite holes in the last 3 holes is probably not going to survive. And I went, whoa, no, what a terrible idea. And then and sat with it for a bit and thought, Hugh is right. And what we get from this is 3 holes that are much better than the existing holes. And the 18th hole, the finishing hole, is substantially better than anything I had come up with originally. So I'm not saying Hugh came up with all the answers, but he did ask all the right questions. And now I'm obsessed and I have to finish it soon. So
before I let you go, we got to ask a couple things. I'll start with Albion Hills, because Jeff and Kara do give you quite a bit of credit for one of the holes, which I believe they've dubbed Project 16, because it is the 16th hole on that course. And boy, that's fun.
Yeah, it was Jeff approached me with this idea. I think at the time Jeff was imagining the course being more of a gold level course. And I suspect it may well become a gold level course. I think that's maybe in the works if the right people sign the right checks and so on. So he asked me to consult. My sense of it was that they had a big project on their hands. They were trying to get people involved in it. And part of what the root of it all was a way to say something kind of nice. They're sort of being inclusive. And of course they gained from having some help, but it was also a sort of art of flattery moment. So I was quite happy to be asked to come and play along, and it was fun. So they sort of said, here's the layout so far. We've got to get from 15 to 17. This is roughly where 16 would happen. And then I walked and I looked and I thought, and it took me a couple hours by myself to get a sense of it. And we came up with a few options, and that had to be sort of run through Jeff's sense of safety. And, one of my first ideas, we were too close to a bike path that I didn't realize was in use. Anyway, I won't go on and on about it. I think the hole, which I haven't seen fully finished, I think it's a pretty successful hole. It's the first time I've worked in plantation rows like that. And my sense was that they were going to have to take out a full additional run of trees, like to go one over, if not two over, for the length that they're working with. But I mean, when I made that claim, it was a bit too late in the game. And I think Jeff and Kara had already asked a bit more than they felt they should about how many trees to take down. So that hole, like all disc golf courses, will continue to evolve. But I was asked to make a hole that was sort of at least reminiscent of my own course, which led me to think about what some of those key features were. And some of it, according to Jeff, was, certain matters to do with the way that it turns, the fact that there are a couple of corners on the hole, the way that I worked to try to figure out a way to make sure that there was a landing zone that gave you a number of different ways to proceed from there. Not just like, if you don't hit this spot, you're in some trouble. And lots of disc golf and golf course designers through the years have talked a great deal about that risk reward dynamic in golf, particularly with respect to tee shots. So I was careful to try to make sure that you had some options with respect to where that first shot lay. There's been some debate that's come to me since then where people are saying, I can't believe that's a par 4. It's got to be a par 5. And I think they're probably right for the layout that this is. It's probably should be a par 5. But if you're thinking about this in terms of what the pros can do, it's absolutely not a par 5. And I've spent ages talking to people and thinking about how to get layouts and pars to work for the right group of people. We just changed the layouts this past weekend for that very reason. And there are people who will say, well, that's absolutely not a par 5. I'm insulted that you would call the 700-foot hole a par 5. And I get it. And I also think there are moments when people need a chance to get an eagle. For our collective psyche, and particularly in competition, and particularly if you are in a division where you don't throw as far, whether that's about age or gender or whatever, these are things you have to consider. So anyway, back to Project 16. I think they were trying to flatter me into getting me to help. I was absolutely thrilled to help out. I had a lot of fun with it. It was a really interesting set of conditions and a very interesting piece of land. And I absolutely love how once you've landed and played up to get ready to approach, so you're around 200 feet out, I think the last 200 feet of that hole is really good. There's sort of that basin, a big black walnut tree in the back that we sort of cleared out so you can see it. I like the rocky ground. I think that's kind of fun. A lot of trees had to die, unfortunately, but I think it's a beautiful finishing chunk of that hole.
It's I haven't solved that hole yet. I'm looking forward to getting back to Albion to try to solve that hole. It is a hole I love to hate at the moment.
I'm happy with that. I mean, and I think Jeff liked that idea too, and Kara as well. I think the idea being that there's no free lunch. A lot of disc golf holes are set up in a way that where most people believe that birdies should be available, and that's a funny parameter to add on to the game. And I agree with the idea in certain contexts, and in other contexts, I think it's a very limiting idea. And I think it's absolutely fine if like all of those problems stop becoming a problem once you're in competition, right? We don't need par in competition, except that there's this funny thing about our psyches where we do want to measure our success hole by hole against par. We simply do. And even if every person involved in design in every format of golf in the world would tell you that they don't like the idea of par, that it is in fact a thorn in their collective sides. And without sounding like an asshole, I kind of agree with that point, except the truth is people want to play against par and they want you to tell them what par is, which is a weird one because I've had arguments with people and said, fine, call it a par 5. Done. it's a par five for you, and this conversation's over. And that's not what they want. They want the layout to say par five. So anyway, I'm glad that hole seems hard. I've seen some chatter online where people go, this hole is sort of an anomaly in this course. It's sort of suddenly way too hard. And the truth about disc golf is if you can throw straight 200 feet, this is the same in ball golf. If you can hit it straight about 225 yards in ball golf, and you can do that a second time straight under control, there's almost no hole that you can't par in either game. I mean, the people that I know and love who play my course regularly, who play lots of other courses and play competitively, almost always say things to me like, the time you get screwed up at Project 15 is when you get aggressive or you get greedy after a bad shot. Which is not to say that this course is amazing when you are a swashbuckling, aggressive disc golf player. In fact, it's calling for a fairly conservative, under control style of play. Yes, there's gain to be made if you get more aggressive and hit your lines. I mean, that has to be there. But if you come out to my course and you throw 250 straight, you will be competing for par on every single hole. If you think you need to get more than 300 and you don't get it, you'll be in some trouble. And birdies turn into bogeys really fast. So the locals like to say things like, for this style of design, if there's a name for it, people like to say things like par is a good score, which doesn't sound terribly exciting. But I also don't think that the idea of everybody having a chance to birdie every single hole, I don't think that works either. I think surviving holes is okay. And I think holes that average above par is okay. Some people want to fight me on that, but that, in my opinion, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, when I played hole 3 the first round on Sunday, I felt like I absolutely pumped 3 straight distance drivers, and I still had like a 75-foot jump putt to even attempt a birdie on that pin. Now, do I think that hole's too hard? No. I realize that it's nice and open if I can get every ounce of energy that I should behind my shots, I'll have a chance. But my mechanics aren't perfect by any means. And so I'd rather be safe and in the fairway than absolutely blow my shoulder out for a chance at a birdie. But
yeah, and you only needed another 10 or 20% on each of those full shots to give yourself a tap-in birdie, as opposed to a 75-footer. And how many of those 75-footers are you going to throw in? If you threw 100 in a row, you'd probably throw 6 of those in, right? So you're still putting yourself in a pretty reasonable chance to score. And, this question of against the field, a bunch of people are in the woods on their second shot. One thing people screw up all the time on hole 3, they throw a very good drive and they don't account for the fact that their second shot, their front foot is about 4 inches below their back foot. And the timing as you come around, when the ground doesn't show up where you expect it to go, you either get this hard lean way off to the right, or they sort of saw it off and the disc never gets up to flat. But that's one of those sort of local things you have to understand. And you have to play for position. I call the hole gateway because you've got to put yourself in a spot where you can throw down those last channels to get a chance to get near the basket. And just pumping it and attacking that last channel from afar often doesn't put you in a good place at all. Excuse me.
No problem. Okay, last but not least, because I promised I might ask you. Before you got into disc golf, I understand that you played professional football in the CFL. As a matter of fact, I think for the Argonauts. What
I did.
What was that experience like?
It was neat, and I feel really lucky to have had a chance to do it. Football is a kind of a brutal game, and I don't mean that in a physical sense. Like it is a brutal game physically. I mean that in a kind of life swallowing sense. And for me, I loved playing ball when I was younger. I played through university in Toronto. And it kind of kept happening. I made the team with the Argonauts afterwards. I was invited to a tryout and I made the team. My second season with the Argonauts, we were lucky enough and skilled enough as a team to win the Grey Cup. And with the collection of a number of things, including the fact that I was sort of tired of football and worn out by football and sort of chronically hurt, but not actually injured, which means you've just got to keep playing. And the fact that I had some other opportunities in life and business kind of stuff, I decided to retire after my second season of pro, which, in some ways people have said like, oh, most of the time you don't get to sort of control your own destiny in pro sports. You play until someone tells you to go home, or you get broken so badly that you don't get to come back. And I managed to avoid all of that for whatever that's worth, which I think is not very much. But I did get to play and had a really, looking back, it was a great run and met some great guys and traveled all over the country to do it. But, football sort of changes your brain in some ways. And I don't just mean cumulative, traumatic, whatever the E stands for. It like competitive sports are sort of something that you build the ability to do, but you also have to be wired in a certain way. And a lot of that stuff isn't really ideal for civilian life in certain ways. So I bring all that up only to say that there's a kind of obsessiveness that comes with being successful in almost any endeavor, but sports in particular, that hasn't exactly left me. And now that I'm coaching football, I'm running this ridiculous course. And it's all sort of connected to a piece of myself and my identity and my personality that's sort of related to that. I wouldn't call it some kind of pursuit of excellence. I wouldn't use that kind of goofy language, but it is a little bit sort of hyper-focused on this game and this sort of experience and so on that, I don't know. I don't think, I'm not saying it's like super healthy. I don't think it's unhealthy. But it's become more and more an important piece of what I do and who I am. And it's something I love. The disc golf stuff, the way I think about disc golf is certainly informed by some of the ways I learned to think about professional sports, football in particular, which is a really mechanical game. And there's something about learning, having built a brain for that disc golf coursework at the very least satisfies for me. And I played some football. Those were the days. It was fun. And now I'm sort of just as crazy about sports, but I'm doing something slightly different with it.
You mentioned you're coaching. You're back at University of Toronto, I understand.
Yeah, I've been coaching the defensive line for the Blues. They've got a new coach. We have yet to strike a deal. I have a temporary deal with them for coaching the D line. And in the next few weeks, I think we'll have a plan in place with respect to whether or not I can move to Toronto for August, September, and part of October and coach football there and not simply pay to coach. They've got to pull some money together to make me do that. Not because I'm the best coach in the world, but because I don't want to pay to coach. If you need me there, I'm happy to be there. And I like the kids and it's a lot of fun. But you can't run a enterprise like that on volunteer labor. So,
No.
So put up and I'll come be the D-line coach, which I'd love to do. So we'll work it out.
Have to call up some of the American schools that pay their coaches ungodly amounts of money.
Yeah. If I just slept in your basement, I'd have half the problem figured out, but we'll see if Coney's got an idea for me.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Gabe. I really appreciate it. It was, again, such a pleasure to experience your course again this past weekend. All the changes that you make every year that have made it play better, more interesting, and it's certainly a unique experience in disc golf in Ontario. And hopefully we'll get even more pros singing your praises as I do more episodes of this podcast. Well,
I sure love listening to your podcast, and when the course comes up, I'm always kind of pleased. So that's flattering, and I love it. So keep bringing me up, and you're always welcome to come and play. Come anytime, and it was cool having you around the house for the weekend as well. So I'm glad you came and stayed. I wish you'd have accepted more of the betting on Friday night, and you might have been more comfortable. But hey,
it's fine.
I wish I'd also invited you to sleep inside. I just thought you were going to bring a tent, but I don't know why I got that idea. Anyway, man, it's been a pleasure, and I'm glad to chat with you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon, man.
Thanks, Gabe. Have a great one.
Take care.